Hello, it's finally fall in Los Angeles. It's no longer 95 degrees. I have a pumpkin candle burning and the Santa Ana winds are blowing, which means that I need to film my quarter three in film. As always, brought to you by Letterboxd and cute obsessive personality quirks. Ding! Okay, in quarter three, I watched 56 movies, which is better than last time, but is not great because I only watched 8 movies in July. 8. I don't know what was happening. I know I watched a lot of TV. I think I was reading a lot. But quite honestly, there's no excuse for that. 8 movies. But in August, I got back to 20, and in September, I did a very respectable 28. I did keep up my 74% new watch rate. I think it was at 75% last time. 76, so we went down a little bit, but I'll take 74% any day. The goal, I think, for the year is 75. In total for the year so far, I've watched 130 new movies and 45 rewatches. 25 of the movies this quarter were in theaters or in screenings, and my first film of this quarter was Daddy-O. I did a triple feature on July 4th instead of participating in other such festivities, and saw Daddy-O and then Janet Planet and then the third Quiet Place. I liked all of them. I think Daddy-O was probably my favorite just because it was different. If you don't know anything about the film, it's literally just Dakota Johnson and Sean Penn in a taxi together, and there's no like flashbacks, there's no scenes outside of the taxi cab, really. It's like literally only their conversation that's taking place. Felt very reminiscent of like the Before trilogy, not in its quality, although I like Daddy-O. The Before series is like perfect films, but insofar as like it's literally just their conversation the entire time. And I really like that when dialogue is written well, which is hard to do. I love nothing more than just two people in an enclosed space just talking about things that are important. It feels very romantic, and I really like Dakota Johnson. She really works for me. And then Sean Penn is Sean Penn. So my last film of the quarter was Megalopolis. I was one of the few people that went and saw this in theaters. I just had to know. And it was a shit show. And that's not to say that all of it or most of it was like bad. There were a lot of really interesting, and interesting I mean like in a good way, choices made. And I really liked some of the ideas in the storylines and in the characters. But I don't think anyone was on the same page about what film they were making, except for maybe Adam Driver and Coppola. I saw something that was really interesting and seemed very true of like, Adam Driver is one of the best actors because he's always very committed to what the director's vision is. Even if it makes him look silly, he goes all in on what they want from him. And I feel like that definitely rang true here. If you've seen the clips, my favorite part of the film of Go Back to the Club, that is how he is the whole movie. And it seems ridiculous in these like clips, and it does feel ridiculous when you're watching it, but it also feels closest to what Coppola was going for. And some of the other people in the film just didn't totally get that. They weren't all playing in the same film, I don't think. Other standouts from an acting perspective were Aubrey Plaza, the duo of Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf. I love metacasting. I love metacasting so much. I could probably make a whole video about it. And Coppola knew what he was doing with the metacasting. And having those two team up in their weird dynamic was just a delight to watch. My favorite parts of the film were the idea of, in Adam Driver's head, getting to see the statues roaming around. I thought was like a really, really cool visual that they used in, I think, the first teaser. And I was hopeful that those would lend more into the idea of the film itself and be important to the plot, and it wasn't at all. It was just like the way that he was seeing things in the city. But I thought that that was a really cool visual. And then the whole storyline with Vesta Sweetwater, I really thought that her whole bit was really interesting, and I honestly would have taken like a whole film about that, kind of the dark underbelly of purity culture. It's something that I feel very passionately about, having grown up in the church. And I love that Coppola very clearly took some inspiration from like Taylor Swift, working into her Reputation era and such things. This doesn't make any sense if you haven't seen the movie, but there's like a whole little bit about this character and this idea in the movie that I thought was really interesting. But otherwise, it was just insane. None of the pieces matched. It didn't feel like they were creating the same puzzle together. It was definitely like a spectacle. I feel like for the most part, like the art design and the costumes were interesting. But then other bits and pieces, some of the editing choices, the general, like the plot and the storyline didn't really make sense or go together. So I don't know. This next slide is my 15 favorite new to me movies that I have seen this year. So these are all movies that I had never seen before, some of which came out this year, some of which came out years and years ago. Anything with the blue border around it is something that I'm adding for the first time this quarter. The other films are things that have stuck throughout the rest of the year. So number one, as I have discussed many times and will discuss again, is still Book of Clarence. I finally rewatched it this quarter, and honestly within the first scene was like, oh yeah, I don't know why I doubted it. Like, this is definitely my favorite film of the year. As discussed, I don't think it's a perfect film by any means, but I just absolutely love James Samuel's style and could watch 100 more of his movies. I hope that he continues to make things, especially with this team. I love Lakeith Stanfield and RJ Seiler, both of who were in his other film, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But yeah, I love this movie. It's on Netflix if you want to give it a watch. My second favorite movie of the year is Monkey Man. I would really like to rewatch this before the end of the year, if at all possible. But I just absolutely loved how inspired this film felt, and it also comes from the mind of Dev Patel. So, you know, no complaints there. Number 3, Tenet, as discussed. First time watched this year. Absolutely loved it. Rose its way up in the ranks to my second favorite Nolan after Inception, which I just don't think can be beat. Number 4, The Greatest Hits. I just bought this soundtrack on vinyl. I absolutely love this movie. It very clearly just encapsulates so many of the feelings and the romantic ideals that I find so important in my life, and has a great soundtrack to boot. Love, highly recommend. It's on Hulu. Number 5, of course, Dune Part 2. I preferred Dune Part 1. I think I've watched both of these like several times now at this point, and I just really like how the first one is a little more character driven, but I still obviously think that like from a stylistic and technical standpoint, this movie is a feat and will go down in history. And I am interested to see if it wins anything this year, or if they're waiting to give the third film, Dune Messiah, all of the flowers. But obviously this film was just amazing, and Timmy is really proving with every Dune movie his acting chops. The first new film on this list is number 6, Speak No Evil. I know that not everyone loved this film, especially I totally understand. A lot of people were upset that this is, if you don't know, based on, I believe, a Danish film from like 2 years ago. And we being like the American Hollywood system, already remade it and made it like an American film. And I totally understand why people are upset by that. I do think that we need to like stop being afraid of foreign films, and I say that just as much to myself as to anyone else. I know that that is definitely one of my like blind spots in film, But I also know from all of the research that I did on the Danish film that the story is very, very different. And I know that I have no interest in watching the original Danish film because of how extremely disturbing it is. And this film is disturbing, but more in a like thriller way. The other film, I think I would regret ever watching it. I think it would be a little too dark and disturbing for my taste. And this remake with James McAvoy, I think just like bridges the gap really nicely, and it's something that I really enjoyed watching, mostly because of James McAvoy. He is just like one of my favorite actors of all time. I think he is phenomenal. I love how much he was in the media. He was very like oversaturated in the media from doing like the press run for this film, and I enjoyed every second of it. And I just can't wait to continue watching every movie that he makes. He's just like so good, so well pulled off like the charm and charisma needed for this absolute psychopath in this film. And I just had a really good time watching it. Number 7 and 8 are my top 2 most looked forward to films of 2024, and I'm happy to say that they are very high up in my list for the year. It's Trap and Twisters. Trap, M. Night Shyamalan just has such a ridiculous directing style, and I know that it doesn't work for everyone, and I totally understand why, but for the most part it works for me, and it really worked with Trap. Mostly because Josh Hartnett just fed right into it. He just had that goofy goober sense of serious acting style needed to pull off an M. Night film, and I really enjoyed the concept of it as well. Were there gaps? Yes. Were there things that didn't make sense or felt unfinished? Yes. But I loved it. I had so much fun, and at the end of the year, like, that's what this list is for me. It's not like the best made films of the year, it's the films that I enjoyed the most. So number 7 is Trap, and number 8 is Twisters. At the end of my last quarter wrap up, I talked a bit about how excited I was for this film. I grew up watching Twister with my family, like, I swear once a month for like years of my life. This was one of our most rewatched films. My dad is an amateur storm chaser, and it just meant so much to us. I loved Bill Paxton growing up because of this and Titanic, and I was so excited to see Twisters. I have seen it now 3 times in theaters, and the first time I think it didn't, I really enjoyed it, but it didn't land super well, I think just because my expectations were so high. And then the second time I saw it in theaters, I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I just like was comparing it too much to the first one. And then by the third time I saw it, I had completely given into it. I think one of the things that stopped me the most from just absolutely loving it the first time around is that I didn't totally love Daisy Edgar Jones in this role. I really like her in other things. I think her flat affectation really works for like normal people. She's phenomenal in normal people, but I think it just didn't really work super well for me in this particular role. Glen Powell, obviously great, very charming, fits this Southern cowboy thing so well, since that's what he is in real life. But the real standout to me was Anthony Ramos. I'm still mad at him for what he did to Jazzy Jones. However, unfortunately, he is so talented, and I personally felt like I couldn't keep my eyes off of him in the film. I think he just pulls it off the most realistically, and he was the least like caricature, but all of the CGI and the effects and everything was really great. I thought they had a lot of really great new set pieces, but also some set pieces that clearly were paying homage to the first film, and I overall just really enjoyed the experience of getting to watch that. The American Society at number 9 was a film that was already on the list. I would like to rewatch this one. I think it's on Prime or Hulu or something right now. But the next film is one that is new to the list, and it is Sing Sing. When I first saw the trailers for this film, I was like, oh, this is just like Oscar bait. This is A24 trying to get some nominations. And I wasn't looking forward to going to see it. And then I sobbed throughout the film and truly was just like swept away by the performances and the tone in the film. I highly suggest listening to the Big Picture interview with Sean Fennessy with the director and writer of the film, because he gives a lot of really great backstory to how the film was made and written. Mostly, of course, Coleman Domingo is just radiant, and I would be so happy if he were to be nominated and hopefully win for this role. I think he was just absolutely wonderful. He's so good. I love him so much. I'm so happy for him to host the Met Gala next year. Anywho, moving on, a film already on the list, Maestro at number 11. But the last new film at number 12 is Terms of Endearment. This is the Best Picture winner from the 80s, right? Terms of Endearment. Yeah, 1983, Best Picture winner, which very much not a Best Picture winner type of film. I was very surprised at the tone and like the general idea of the film being what won. But I really liked this film despite myself. I think for the most part, what I loved so much about it was the actress that plays the daughter, I think was so quirkily realistic. She just had all of these like mannerisms and the way that she talked to her husband or to her mom that were like, okay, yes, that's how a real person talks to people that they've known their entire lives or loved for that long. And I really loved her dynamic with everyone. On top of just the tone of it was just lovely and heartbreaking, and so I really liked getting into this one. 13, 14, and 15 are all films that I've talked about before. This is The Fall Guy, Problemista, and Origin. I would recommend watching all of them for very different reasons. I feel like these films might be booted off by the end of the year, but my main piece of advice is to have tissues ready for Origin. This next slide is my favorite 2024 movie. So this is my favorite movie that came out this year, and of course this is also The Book of Clarence. To talk a little bit more about my rewatch, I also did this as a double feature with The Harder They Fall, which is James Samuel's first film that came out on Netflix. This stars a lot of the same cast of characters like Keith Stanfield and RJ Cyler, but also starred Idris Elba and Jonathan Majors and Regina King and Zazie Beetz. And I really, really loved this film the first time I watched it. I just love his like anachronistic, sumptuous style. I think it is so much fun. I would so much rather have like a serious idea of a movie with these like fun tonal shifts in this way that he like just does so perfectly. I don't know, it's so hard to explain unless you watch it. But he also has like the best soundtracks, and it was so fun to watch these back to back because in his first film, In The Harder They Fall, RJ Cyler's character actually says something about, well, according to the Book of Clarence, which was such a fun little Easter egg to get into his second film, and I'm just so excited to see what else he ends up doing. The next slide is the films that I have watched the most this year, which is tied right now between Dune Part 2 and Twisters at 3 watches each. Twisters, all 3 of those were in theaters, and Dune Part 2, 2 of them were in theaters, and then 1 was at home. And the last slide is my top actor for the year. It is Robert Pattinson with 9 films. I actually didn't add any new films to this list this quarter. I would like to get at least 1 more movie on this list to get him to 10, but I've really enjoyed diving into his stuff. I did always think that he was a good actor, but it's been fun to see him change his choices, the choices of films that he's in the older he gets. But my favorite role of his, I think, is always going to be Neil in Tenet. I just absolutely love that character so much, and he plays his heart on the screen so well. I love you, Neil. So that is my Q3 wrap up. It is already almost the end of October, so we'll be getting to the end of the year wrap up very quickly. I have been in a little bit of a movie rut recently. I feel like I've been doing a lot of traveling, and I'm doing a lot more traveling the rest of this year, and so I'm nervous to see how my numbers look for October, November, December, but I feel like I have quite a few to see in theaters this week and next week. A lot of good stuff seems to be coming out right now, so I'm looking forward to all of that. Bye!